blank underscore blank. A black woman walked into the insurance center. She was modestly dressed, carrying a folder with an already approved claim. She wasn't angry. She didn't raise her voice. She only wanted to claim what was rightfully hers. But within minutes, she was mocked, interrogated, denied, and finally, told to try a pawnshop instead. What they didn't know was that they had just turned away the most powerful person in the entire corporation. And just 12 minutes later, the entire branch was shaken. 3 managers were fired, and a nationwide reform was set into motion. Do you think this was just an isolated incident? Or is it the truth we've all ignored for far too long? Round pushpin. This is the story that forced the entire insurance industry to rethink fairness, and made us all ask ourselves, how many times have we stayed silent when wrongdoing happened right before our eyes? 9 a.m. The reception hall of Aegis Health Insurance headquarters felt like a sterile chamber, where every sound seemed filtered through glass and the harsh white glow of fluorescent lights. The customer service counter stretched like an invisible fence, cold, orderly, and utterly emotionless. The steady clacking of keyboards, the soft flutter of turning pages, and the low hum of printers created a rhythm like that of a machine long running past its prime. A black woman stepped in quietly. No one noticed her at first because she wasn't carrying a designer bag, wasn't wearing flashy makeup, and certainly wasn't dressed in the sleek office attire usually associated with power in the industry. She wore a simple navy coat, black slacks, and low-heeled shoes. Her naturally curly hair was neatly tied back, her face nearly expressionless. Yet it was precisely this simplicity that made her seem out of place amidst the polished glitz of the nation's leading insurance corporation. Her name was Danielle Thompson. But at this moment, no one in that room knew, or even cared to know, what that name meant. Danielle approached counter 4. She handed over a neatly organized file, each page clipped precisely, with a table of contents attached. It was a medical insurance claim for a workplace accident. The approved amount, $115. A significant sum, yes, but fully justified under the company's policy. The first person to receive the file was Emily Johnson, a young employee who had been working there for less than 2 years. Emily's eyes widened slightly at the bold number on the first page. Though she said nothing, her expression said it all. How could someone like her be entitled to this much money? Emily glanced at Danielle, then at the manager's office. She hesitated for a few seconds before doing exactly what her training told her. She pressed the button to summon a direct supervisor. Just minutes later, Susan Whitmore appeared. She wore a chic beige suit, glossy brown heels, and a silk Hermes scarf elegantly tied around her neck. Susan was the type who walked like she was on a runway. Her face bore not a single wrinkle, not because she'd never been angry, but because she'd long mastered the art of projecting authority with her eyes, not her brows. Susan looked at Danielle, a glance, not to assess, but to judge. Then she looked down at the file, flipped through a few pages, reached the final sheet with the approval signature, and then pushed the file gently back toward Danielle. "I'm sorry, but we can't process an amount this large based solely on a file that anyone could print and bring in," she said, her voice soft but glacial. "Frankly speaking, She glanced Danielle up and down once more. You don't look like someone who qualifies for that kind of money. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. A few waiting clients began to glance toward counter 4. Some nearby employees whispered. No one laughed out loud, but the contempt in their expressions was unmistakable. A middle-aged man wearing a claims advisor badge smirked, shook his head slightly, and muttered half-jokingly, "She must think this is some kind of New Year's lottery." Danielle didn't react. She didn't pull out her phone to record anything. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood upright, her eyes calm, her voice slow and clear. "I am only requesting a payment that your system has approved, on time, with the proper documentation, and by my rightful benefits. Not a word too many. Not a word too few." And that calm composure threw Susan off. Just for a brief second. Before she recovered with a scoffing smile. "Then I'm afraid you've come to the wrong place. Claims of that size should be handled through a law office, or the pawn shop a few blocks down. I hear they deal with customers like you much faster than we do." A soft squeak of high heels. A curt nod toward the security guard. Danielle looked around. She knew every camera was recording. Every move was being documented. But no one knew that in the plain fabric bag she carried today was a weapon far more powerful than administrative authority. Truth, trust, and legitimacy. She slowly placed the file back on the counter, took out her phone, and dialed a number. No one in that office knew that 12 minutes later, the entire room would be shaken. A few careers would end, and a seemingly indestructible system would be forced to rebuild, because they had chosen the wrong person to look down on. No one could have imagined that the woman who had just been denied her insurance claim once started no differently than millions of ordinary people, with no privilege, no connections, only a burning desire to enter a world she knew all too well, a world that was never built to welcome someone like her. 25 years ago, the Aegis Health Insurance Building didn't yet have its gleaming glass lobby. At the time, the company was still expanding, hiring swarms of fresh graduates for entry-level call center roles. Among the eager young faces on their first day of work was a skinny girl with glasses, curly hair tied back, and an old briefcase tucked under her arm, the only possession she had after leaving the low-income neighborhoods in the city's southern edge. Her name was Danielle Thompson, and back then, she was just an intern in the customer support department. Every day, she wore a headset for 8 straight hours, answered hundreds of calls, and took notes without missing a single punctuation mark. While others saw it as a stopgap job, Danielle treated it like survival. She studied the claims processing manuals religiously, learned how the internal systems worked, and memorized every case of injustice she came across. That's when she began to uncover a chilling truth. Black customers, immigrants, and manual laborers were often asked for more documents. They had to wait longer. And the system's rejections were cold, devoid of ownership or empathy. She didn't cry. She didn't quit. She quietly documented everything. 3 years later, she was promoted to claims coordinator. 5 years later, she became head of claims resolution. She wasn't just good, she was relentless. She never bowed her head, never complained. She did the right thing, even if it meant going against the very system she worked for. 10 years in, when a major branch director was under investigation for mass denying claims from immigrant clients. It was Danielle who submitted the report with the supporting evidence. She didn't hide her name. She signed it boldly. And she accepted every consequence. That made her someone who could no longer be overlooked. When the company sent her to pursue an MBA at Harvard, on a scholarship funded by Aegis, no one was surprised. And when she returned as regional director of the East Coast, the data spoke for itself. The highest customer satisfaction rate, the best claim processing efficiency, and above all, not a single case of discrimination reported. She rose step by step, quietly, without media praise. When she was appointed Chief Operating Officer, some still whispered, "She's reached the ceiling. There's no way she can go higher. She's a black woman. Too many barriers." And they weren't entirely wrong. Because yes, she had hit the glass ceiling. But it was their ceiling. And she was already laying the bricks to break it from the inside. 3 months ago, the former CEO of Aegis retired. The board had to choose a successor. Among the list of candidates, Danielle's name stood at the top. With over 2 decades of experience, outstanding performance metrics, and respect from both employees and customers. But behind closed doors, whispers still circled. What will our clients think if the face of the company is a black woman? Can she handle high-level events? Investor conferences? They didn't question her competence. They questioned her skin color, gender, and background. Yet in the end, they couldn't deny her merit. Danielle Thompson was appointed CEO of Aegis Health Insurance, becoming the first black woman to lead a top-tier national health insurance corporation. During her inauguration speech, standing before the press, she said, "I am committed to building a system where every customer, regardless of skin color, status, or income, is treated with equal respect. And if that's not the case, then I will be the first to go find out why." No one expected that just 3 months later, she would be forced to uphold that very promise, in disguise. On an ordinary morning, with a seemingly simple request, only to uncover a harsh, sobering truth. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank. In the first few months of her tenure as CEO, Danielle Thompson made no rush to change anything. She didn't announce any restructurings. She didn't redraw the org chart. She didn't summon endless meetings about a new vision. She quietly studied the data. Because she knew all too well, in a system built to obscure the truth, numbers never lie. On paper, Aegis Health Insurance was operating at an excellent level. Checkmark claim processing on time, 96%. Checkmark average customer satisfaction rating, 4.3 out of 5. Checkmark internal complaints down, 18% compared to last year. Checkmark and notably, the central branch, where that morning's incident had taken place, ranked top 3 nationwide in performance. But for someone like Danielle, who had once stood behind that very counter, those numbers had a scent. A familiar scent. The smell of intentional filtering. She requested full access to unpublished internal reports, the overlooked logs, the edited customer surveys. The deleted call recordings management was deemed non-essential. And then, layer by layer, the mask began to fall. Downward trend. What did she uncover? At several branches, clients who were Black or Latino were asked to provide 2 to 4 additional documents, even when the system didn't require them. Claims that were inconvenient for staff were often redirected to a secondary holding queue, doubling their processing time. Clients who looked modest, plain clothes, working class appearance, were more likely to be flagged as insurance fraud risks. And the most frightening part, no one complained, not because they were satisfied, but because they had grown used to enduring it. Danielle remembered a story from long ago. Back when she was still working the call center, an elderly woman once called, sobbing, after being told her cancer medication claim was denied for missing the original receipt. "I sent it, I did, but the staff said I was being too much of a bother." That story had haunted Danielle for years. And now, she realized, it wasn't an outlier, it was a pattern. With the full authority of a CEO, Danielle didn't rush to expose these findings. She chose to do something no one expected. She disguised herself as a customer to face the system she now led. No press conference, no media coverage, no investigative task force. Just a Black woman, standing in line, holding a valid file, waiting her turn to be served like any other customer. This wasn't a test. It was the truth she knew had to be exposed, in the most direct way possible. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The number on the document, $115, seemed to create an invisible gravitational pull throughout the service lobby. Emily, the young employee assisting Danielle, was no longer as composed as she'd been earlier. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the insurance card and ID. Her eyes darted repeatedly between the photo and the woman standing before her. There was no error in the paperwork, no inconsistencies. But what made Emily hesitate was the feeling that this woman didn't fit the image of someone entitled to that kind of money. Emily subtly turned to whisper to the man beside her, Brian Carter, a supervisory associate. Brian glanced at the file, then at Danielle. No smile, no words, just a silent nod. Moments later, Brian stepped forward, standing tall behind Emily like a looming wall. His voice rang out, louder than necessary. "Is there a problem with this request?" But the question wasn't meant for Emily. It was aimed squarely at Danielle. In an instant, the eyes of nearby clients began turning in their direction. An elderly man in the second row leaned forward slightly. A receptionist looked over, then quickly pretended to focus on his screen. Danielle remained calm. She gently laid her insurance card and documents back on the counter. "There is no problem. I am simply requesting the payout I'm entitled to. The claim was approved. The documents are complete. I just want to follow the process." Brian furrowed his brow, glanced at Emily, then back at Danielle. He picked up the paperwork, inspecting it like he was hunting for a flaw. "For guilt. We've seen some suspicious activity lately with claims like this. We have to be extremely cautious. You understand, right? Claims like this. No explanation needed." His meaning was painfully clear. Danielle didn't answer. She'd heard comments like that her entire career. This wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the documents. It was about her face, her skin, the status they didn't believe someone like her could hold. Emily kept her head down, nervously picking at the corner of the file folder. She said nothing, and in that silence, she made her choice. Sometimes, silence is a form of violence. 2. At that moment, Logan Brooks, a senior employee, walked over holding a steaming cup of coffee. He leaned in to whisper to Brian, just loud enough for Danielle to hear. Could be one of those money laundering or fake medical cases. Look at how she's dressed. He spoke, but his eyes didn't avoid Danielle's. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, undisguised contempt. We're just trying to protect you, ma'am, because if that money isn't yours, you're in serious trouble. Danielle didn't flinch. She calmly picked up her papers. Her voice low but sharp. I've been a legal client of Aegis for over 15 years. I don't need protection from my own rights. The moment her words landed, the office door in the back swung open. The sharp click of high heels echoed across the marble floor. Susan Whitmore had arrived. She approached the counter with the stern expression of someone used to commanding authority. She didn't greet the client. Didn't ask for a name. Didn't smile. Her eyes scanned the file, barely glancing, as if a single look was enough to judge the entire person. I heard you're trying to claim a rather large sum? I'm the person in charge here. Danielle looked her straight in the eye. And I'm simply trying to complete my valid transaction. Susan gave a polite smile. But her eyes did not. A payout of over $100,000? For someone like you? To be frank, if you did come into that kind of money, I'd imagine you'd feel more comfortable going to a community financial center or a public welfare office. The air in the service hall froze. No one said a word. But everyone understood. This was no longer about paperwork. This was an attack on dignity. A declaration of status and belonging. Who deserves what? And who never will? Danielle drew in a slow breath. Her hand moved toward her bag. A subtle gesture, but one that signaled the storm was about to begin. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank. In the insurance industry, it's often said that every decision must be based on risk, not emotion. But that morning, at the main service center of Aegis Health, no one could tell anymore where procedure ended and prejudice began. Susan Whitmore, the branch manager, stood across from Danielle, her gaze ice cold. She held the ID and documents as if they were something unclean. Touching only the farthest corner. $115. That's quite a sum. May I ask what you intend to use it for? A question that, on the surface, seemed reasonable. But the truth was, not a single client that morning had been asked that question. Not the businessman who withdrew $80 for medical equipment. Not the young woman approved for a $50 claim after a skiing injury. They took their money, no questions asked. Only Danielle, the black woman in modest clothes, was asked to explain. Danielle didn't answer immediately. She looked around, slowly, at every eye in the room. The staff who had smiled minutes ago were now silent. A few clients bowed their heads, pretending not to hear. A middle-aged woman pulled her child closer and whispered something, as if teaching them to stay away from trouble. Danielle placed her hand on the counter, her voice low, firm, and clear. I am under no obligation to explain the use of a payout that has already been approved. I am simply exercising my rightful insurance benefit. Susan chuckled. The familiar kind of laugh used by those who think they sit above judgment. Rightful? She tilted her head. I don't think someone like you truly understands that word. Each word pierced the air like a needle. The room grew heavy. No one dared to speak. But then, Logan Brooks, still standing nearby, decided to throw fuel on the fire. He crossed his arms and tilted his head like he was interrogating a suspect. Came into money recently? Lottery win? Or maybe an inheritance from someone who suddenly passed? Or a lawsuit, maybe? Because people like you don't usually have that kind of money, unless they get lucky. That wasn't innuendo anymore. It was a blunt, unapologetic judgment on her background, her gender, her skin color, and all the societal biases tied to it. Danielle clenched her hand, not out of anger, but to brace herself against a familiar pain. The pain of being turned into a symbol of suspicion. Just because she didn't fit the mold they expected. Her voice remained calm, but sharper, clearer. If I were a white man in an Armani suit, would I be answering these questions right now? Silence. Susan didn't reply. Logan didn't reply. Emily stared at the papers, her hands trembling slightly. Then, Susan stepped closer, so near that Danielle could smell the faint trace of expensive perfume. Honestly, she said, you'd be more comfortable somewhere like a community assistance center. Or that money wiring place down the block. They're used to requests like yours. The mask had dropped. No more pretense. No more professionalism. Only prejudice. Turned into an insult. The room stood still. The click of ticket numbers. The hum of printers. All disappeared into the chill of humiliation. An elderly black man in a postal uniform let out a quiet sigh. Not out of surprise, but because he had seen this too many times before. Danielle turned slightly to the side. She reached into her bag, took out her phone. No raised voice, no threats, no demands for security. Just a phone call, spoken with clarity, authority, and unshakable poise. Michelle, I'm at the main service center. They're denying the payout, and they just said something that you need to hear. The storm hadn't hit yet, but the clouds were thick, and the sky was already dark. Blank, underscore, blank, blank, underscore, blank. The phone pressed against Danielle's ear looked as harmless as any routine moment. A woman pulling out her phone to make a call. Something that happened hundreds of times a day in this service lobby. But no one, not a single person, realized that this call was about to unlock a tidal wave that would soon engulf the entire system. Michelle, I'm at the main branch service center. They've just refused to process an already approved claim. And there were inappropriate remarks. Danielle's voice remained steady, clear, not a hint of anger. But it was precisely that calm that made everything more terrifying. Behind her, Logan Brooks elbowed Brian Carter. Smirking. Who's she calling? Her lawyer. She thinks a phone call's gonna scare someone? Brian chuckled, then glanced at Susan, awaiting the unspoken green light. Susan gave a faint nod, her face openly disdainful. If she wants to make a scene, we can just call security. People like her always find a way to cause trouble, just to demand special treatment. People like her. That phrase, so casual, so coded, yet chilling, was spoken in front of dozens. without a shred of shame. Emily, the original intake clerk, was now trembling as she stared at her keyboard. She tried to appear focused, but her eyes couldn't stop drifting toward the woman she once dismissed as just another client with an unusually large claim. Danielle's gaze swept across her, not accusing, but so unwavering that it made it impossible to look away from the truth. On the other end of the line, Michelle Alvarez, Chief Operating Officer of Aegis Health Insurance, stood bolt upright. Her face went pale when she saw the name on her screen. "Wait, you're where right now? At the branch? This very moment?" Danielle didn't elaborate. "Yes. I need you to access the system immediately. Pull all surveillance footage. Record and preserve everything. No legal summons. No public announcements." A single command from the CEO was enough to shift the gears of an entire corporate infrastructure within seconds. At Aegis headquarters, inside the typically quiet surveillance operations room, where national branch cameras were monitored by a small elite team, an alert flashed red. The system received a classified internal directive: emergency black flag verification, a protocol reserved only for incidents involving senior executives. Live feeds from the branch were pulled up, audio amplified. Danielle's face appeared, crystal clear, on the central monitors. A technician whispered to the floor supervisor, That's the CEO. She's actually at the branch. And no one there realizes it." The supervisor immediately dialed level 21, the executive board floor. Back at the branch, Susan Whitmore was growing impatient. "Ma'am, if you're not here for a valid transaction, I'll need you to leave the counter. We can't have customers disturbing the facility." Danielle turned slightly, no longer directly facing Susan. She continued her call, her tone now sharper, each word slicing through the performance of civility. "Yes, they said exactly that. There are witnesses. There's a video. All documentation is intact. I'll remain here, and I ask that you arrive at this branch within 15 minutes." That line was thunder. Susan froze. Logan narrowed his eyes. Brian straightened in his seat. Emily looked up, stunned. "Michelle Alvarez? Coming here? Someone just called up to the executive level?" Susan let out a dry laugh. "Oh, come on. Don't tell me you think you can summon the chief operating officer over?" "A minor misunderstanding?" Danielle didn't turn back. She simply added one final sentence, a sentence no one in that room would ever forget. "Don't worry. She's on her way. And when she arrives, everything here will be documented. This won't be a misunderstanding anymore. It'll be a corrupt system, finally exposed." The clock struck 10:17 a.m. A moment that seemed routine. But it marked the end of 3 careers. And the beginning of a reckoning. The Aegis health insurance system had never seen before. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank. 21st floor, Aegis Health Insurance Headquarters. The Executive Operations Room, normally a sanctuary of quiet strategy meetings under soft lighting and the aroma of fresh coffee, had now transformed into a command center. Michelle Alvarez, Chief Operating Officer, stepped into the surveillance room with eyes as sharp as blades. Behind her were 2 aides, one from legal, one from human resources. All monitors had been redirected to a single location, the main service center, where Danielle Thompson, the CEO of the entire system, was being publicly humiliated by her subordinates. A nervous technician pressed a button to zoom in. This is camera 4, best audio feed. Footage starts from 9:15. When she walked in, Michelle said nothing. She stood motionless, arms crossed. The entire room fell silent as the screen played back. $115,000? For someone like you? You might want to try a pawn shop. They're more used to clients like you. People like this always think they're being treated unfairly, when really, they just don't know their place. The glow of the screen washed across the faces of powerful people. But in this moment, they were the ones on trial before an invisible court of justice. Edward Chambers, chairman of the board, slowly set his coffee cup down. His voice was gravelly. This is happening at our headquarters? That's the CEO. They're doing this to our CEO. A supervisor added, his voice quiet but firm. Not just the CEO. We have data from the entire morning. At least 8 similar cases, Asian, Latino, and Black clients, were mistreated, delayed, or asked for unnecessary documents. Meanwhile, white clients, even with larger claims, were served immediately. Michelle turned toward the adjacent conference room, where a quarterly strategy meeting was in session. She walked in without knocking. Stop. We have a serious issue. Our main branch, the one bearing the Aegis name, is violating every service, ethical, and legal standard we claim to uphold. All eyes turned to the screen, now synced with the feed. There, they saw Danielle, the woman they had once stood and applauded just 3 months ago at her inauguration, now being treated like a scammer. Someone from the board whispered, "Didn't she just receive the National Medal for Financial Equity? How did no one recognize her?" Michelle answered with a line no one dared to challenge. Because they didn't look. They looked at her clothes, her skin. They didn't look at the person. Immediately, Michelle ordered full access to the branch's personnel files. Susan Whitmore, Logan Brooks, Brian Carter, and Emily Johnson, their names lit up on a digital display. Along with performance ratings, internal notes, and complaint records marked as resolved. She turned to legal. Extract all internal emails from the last 6 months. Compare claim processing patterns by demographic group. And prepare me a preliminary charge file for discrimination. I want it in 2 hours. A board member cautiously asked, "Michelle, are you going down there yourself?" Michelle replied, without hesitation, "I'm not going. We are. Myself and 3 of you will be on site in 10 minutes. Not to observe, to bear witness." Meanwhile, at the main service center, Danielle had ended her call. She slipped her phone into her bag and stood upright, her face calm, composed, as if she already knew that every eye, from above, was now watching her. Susan still didn't understand what was coming. Logan and Brian stood with their arms folded. Emily quietly stepped back. None of them realized that from this moment on, every word they spoke, every move they made, it was being streamed directly to the highest seat of power. And there would be no place left to hide. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank. 10:36 a.m. While Susan Whitmore still basked in her illusion of authority, smirking, while Logan Brooks stood with arms crossed. and Brian Carter blocked the path with a dominating gaze. The glass doors of the Aegis Service Center burst open. The sharp slam echoed through the lobby like thunder on a quiet morning. Every head turned in unison, and time itself seemed to pause. Michelle Alvarez walked in, National Director of Client Services, her stride sharp. Her eyes like blades, dark brown hair tied high. In her hand was a glowing tablet screen, displaying the live footage of everything that had transpired at the counter just moments ago. Following behind her were three others: Edward Chambers, chairman of the board; Catherine DuPont, head of human resources; James Lynn, chief of legal affairs. The four of them, names that had never before graced the service floor, were now walking straight into the branch center. Like the last remaining defenders of justice. For 5 long seconds, no one said a word. Susan went pale. She didn't know what was worse: Michelle's sudden appearance, or not being warned about it. Director Alvarez? Why you came here unannounced? Michelle didn't answer. She raised the tablet and tapped a button. The screen projected an image of Danielle surrounded by staff. Interrogated. Mocked. The audio rang out, loud and clear across the lobby. People like this always think they're being treated unfairly. If she has that money, it probably came from somewhere shady. The entire service center froze. An elderly client dropped his pen. A woman covered her mouth in shock. Emily took another step back, hand over her lips, face ashen. Logan swallowed hard. Brian looked down. Susan still stood, but her eyes had lost their place to rest. Michelle scanned the room, then walked straight to Danielle, still standing in the center like an unmoved pillar in the eye of the storm. She stopped before her, and for the first time, everyone watched Michelle bow her head slightly. "I'm sorry. Especially because this happened, right here." Danielle didn't reply. She didn't need to, because no one could deny the truth anymore. Michelle turned, facing the branch employees. Her voice rang out like a verdict. "This is Danielle Thompson, CEO of the entire Aegis health insurance system. The woman you just rejected. The woman you just questioned. The woman you just humiliated." A collective gasp filled the room. Logan stepped back. Brian lowered his head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Susan staggered slightly. Emily trembled, tears streaming down her face. The waiting clients all rose to their feet. There was no applause, no cheers, just silence. But in their eyes, a storm of justice glowed quietly. For the first time, justice arrived in broad daylight, no microphones, no courtroom. Michelle didn't wait for a reaction. She turned to Catherine DuPont, the HR head, and delivered a sentence the entire insurance industry would remember. "Prepare immediate termination notices for Susan Whitmore, branch manager; Logan Brooks, senior supervisor; Brian Carter, claims processing associate. Reason: severe discriminatory conduct in violation of Aegis ethical policies and professional standards." No room for debate, no more excuses, no need for another meeting. Effective immediately, Michelle stated. Have security escort them to retrieve their belongings. They are to be removed from this facility within 15 minutes. Security stepped forward. Jared, the young guard who had stood silently in the corner all morning, now moved with a different air. Firm. resolute, and perhaps relieved. The storm had arrived, but instead of destroying the system, it had come to cleanse it. As the three disgraced staff members left the counter, faces buried under the weight of dozens of watching eyes, Michelle turned to Danielle, and for the first time that day, smiled. "We'll clean this place up and rebuild it from the ground." Danielle nodded. No praise was needed, no recognition sought, because what she had done wasn't to earn applause. It was to redraw the line between professionalism and inhumanity. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank. There was no courtroom, no jury, only the truth, and what the cameras had captured. Only the eyes of those present, forced to witness the result of a system that had been operating in the wrong direction for far too long. 3 people, Susan, Logan, and Brian, walked into the internal office, followed by security. No handcuffs, no shouting, but every step felt as heavy as if they were walking into a sentencing chamber. And in a way, they were. No one was convicted of a crime that day, but each was judged for how they had dismissed the dignity of another human being. Danielle didn't leave. She didn't get justice and walk away. She stayed to face them, to give each person a chance to look at the woman they had demeaned and ask themselves one question. What have I done? Michelle stepped onto a small platform in the lobby, facing the remaining staff, those now standing in straight lines, but unable to lift their heads. Beside her stood Danielle Thompson, still in her simple attire, still calm, like someone who knew that anger may burn fast, but true change must come from clarity and composure. Today, 3 people were terminated, not just because of what they said, but because they believed they had the right to categorize clients based on appearance, voice, skin color, and demeanor. They didn't act alone. They acted in front of all of you. And they were not stopped. No one responded. Michelle turned her gaze toward counter 4, where Emily Johnson was still standing, eyes red, hands gripping the edge of the desk. Danielle walked slowly toward the young woman. Emily burst into tears, not out of fear of being fired, but because she knew she had stayed silent, and that silence had enabled wrong to happen. I didn't know what to do. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't. Danielle didn't interrupt. She let her speak, with all the trembling honesty of a young worker caught in the inertia of a silent culture. Only after a pause did Danielle speak, her voice low, but every word sharp as a blade slicing through the layers of defensiveness. Inaction is also a choice, but recognizing it and choosing to change is a second chance. She turned to Michelle and gave a subtle nod. Michelle stepped forward and addressed the entire branch. Emily Johnson will not be terminated. She will be placed under a mentorship program, but as interim branch manager. Because while others mocked and turned away, she was the only one who showed discomfort. And today, we're not just punishing the wrong, we're giving a chance to those who want to make it right. A murmur rippled through the room. Those who once saw Emily as just another follower were now forced to look again. The young woman bowed her head, not in shame, but in acknowledgement that she still had the chance to do the right thing. Danielle stepped forward. For the first time that day, she truly looked into every face standing before her, the same faces that had laughed at her, doubted her, judged her for a worn jacket and natural hair. I didn't come here to threaten anyone. I didn't come here to bring anyone down. I came to tell you one thing. From this day forward, silence will no longer be excused. Each of you must choose to stand with justice, or step aside and be removed." She paused, her voice lowered, reverberating through the very core of the room. "Aegis doesn't need perfect people. We need people willing to change, starting with themselves." And in that moment, inside a service lobby that had once been nothing more than a place of cold transactions, something shifted. Not the rules, not the policy, but awareness. And when awareness changes, the system has no choice but to change with it. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Dot. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Emily Johnson. The young woman who had once sat trembling behind counter 4 on that fateful morning, was now standing before the entire executive board, the branch staff, and the very woman she had once doubted. But what mattered most was this: she was not punished. She was chosen. Danielle looked at her, not with condescending forgiveness, but with a deeply human gaze. The gaze of someone who had once made mistakes. Someone now offering a hand at a crossroads, and inviting her forward. Emily bowed her head, tears falling silently. She drew a deep breath, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I don't think I deserve this." I stayed silent. I saw it, and I didn't do anything. Danielle placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I was once like you. Early in my career, I watched a customer get their name mispronounced 3 times. I didn't correct it, and I carried the guilt of that moment for years." Emily looked up, eyes still wet. But something in her gaze had changed. Awakening. Michelle stepped forward, declaring to the entire branch, effective immediately, Emily Johnson will serve as interim branch manager. She will be guided, trained, and monitored over the next 90 days. If, during this time, she demonstrates growth in leadership, conflict resolution, and professional ethics, she will be appointed permanently. The lobby fell into silence. Not from protest, but from surprise, from emotion. Because for the first time, someone was not elevated for their metrics, but for their humanity. A black customer standing near the entrance stepped forward, extending a hand to Emily. "You rejected my claim last month. But today, I'll be resubmitting it, because I believe you're starting to change." Emily grasped his hand, her lips trembling. She couldn't speak, but her tears said everything. Danielle stepped back. She no longer needed to be at the center of the frame. Because at this moment, it wasn't about her. It was about a system learning how to be human again. As she turned away, another young employee approached. He hadn't been called out, hadn't been publicly named. He bowed slightly. "Ms. Thompson, I've stayed silent too when I saw bias. But if there's going to be internal training, I'd like to be the first to sign up." Danielle smiled and nodded. "You don't need to wait for a program. Starting today, we are the training." On the wall, where a digital sign once advertised, "Fast, accurate, trusted," a new message had been uploaded by direct order from the CEO's office. At Aegis, every customer deserves respect. If you've ever felt otherwise, call the CEO's office directly. 1-800-AEGIS-HONOR. We're listening. We're changing. One day at a time. Blank. underscore, blank, blank, underscore, blank. 3 days later, against a white backdrop, under the blaze of dozens of television cameras, Danielle Thompson, the first black CEO of Aegis Health Insurance, stood before hundreds of reporters at the largest press conference in the company's history. No flowery speeches, no performative apologies, just clarity and a decisive plan. What happened at our central branch was not an isolated incident. It is a clear reflection of a systemic issue, one that has been allowed to fester for far too long in this industry. She paused, not to catch her breath, but to make it clear. This wasn't just Aegis' story. It was the story of every organization that had once boasted about service, while forgetting human dignity. Then, she unveiled a statement that would become a landmark in the industry's history. Blank, underscore, blank. Round pushpin the Equity First Initiative, a system-wide commitment to justice. $50 million United States dollars allocated to anti-discrimination training, anonymous customer service evaluations, and dedicated listening programs for overlooked clients. The formation of the Disadvantaged Client Advisory Board, made up of individuals who had experienced discrimination, was invited to help redesign company policy, restructuring employee performance evaluations to include fairness in service and feedback from clients across different demographic groups. Deployment of AI-powered behavior monitoring cameras to detect nonverbal discrimination in client-staff interactions. 3-year data audit to identify and address regions with abnormal claim denial patterns based on geographic or socioeconomic factors. Blank, underscore, blank. The press room held its breath. No one had expected a single incident, one seemingly minor encounter, to trigger a reform of this magnitude. But Danielle wasn't finished. To every client who was ever dismissed, doubted, or labeled ineligible because you didn't dress the part, didn't speak the way they expected, or didn't have the right voice, we heard you, and now we act. News outlets went live with breaking headlines. Black CEO reshapes insurance industry with historic reforms. Justice moves from the sidelines to the center of strategy. In the 6 months that followed, Aegis became a national model. Hundreds of former employees reapplied, this time with a different mindset. Customer complaint numbers dropped by 40%, but letters of appreciation increased 5-fold. Other insurance companies began reaching out to Aegis, seeking guidance on how to reform themselves. Blank, underscore, blank. 1 year later, at a national awards ceremony honoring companies with the greatest social impact, Danielle was invited to the stage, but instead of delivering a speech, she called someone else to stand beside her. Emily Johnson, the young woman who had once stayed silent, once trembled behind a desk, now the official branch manager of the very center where everything had begun. Leading a team of young professionals she had personally mentored, Danielle said just one sentence: "Justice does not begin with power. Justice begins when you choose to face your fear and do the right thing, even when you're not ready." Blank, underscore, blank.